Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello Gaming Nation and welcome to Season 2 of the Dice World Podcast live play series. I'm your host Ian Houlihan, better known as GM Hurley. This is an example play episode using the Genesys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. This season, the adventures will be set in the fantasy Magepunk setting of Night's Edge. Now this setting was developed on the Dice World Podcast by the hosts of the show, GM Flano, GM Huz, GM Caitlin, and of course myself. If you wish to learn more about this setting, we recommend listening to episodes 6 and 7 of the Dice World Podcast, where we create and develop the world on the show. The setting is best described as dystopian, set on Luxon Tenebris, a world ravaged by a cataclysm that shattered the world, shrouding the planet in complete darkness and forcing its inhabitants to flee into the skies. Humankind is on the brink of extinction, and so the humans, both attuned and unblessed, must band together with their former foes, the werewolves, and those cursed from the horrors of the world below, the shade-touched, in order to survive. Living in gigantic floating city-states above the clouds, these unlikely allies use magic and airships to fight the creatures of the shadows on the Night's Edge. In this episode, we'll introduce you to the heroes of our story, the crew of the Lightning Trawler Calamity. This is the first part of a multi-part story arc, so stay tuned to social media for future episode announcements by searching Diceball Podcast or visiting us on the web at thediceballpodcast.com. And now, join us for our first look at Night's Edge, Voyage of Calamity. Before the great fracture, Luxon Tenebris was a spectacle to behold. Seemingly endless lakes, mountains with heights that could only be rumoured, lush forests that housed powerful natural forces, caves encrusted with the most brilliant of crystals, and deserts that shimmered in the light. Even the cities were jewels to be adored, each crafted through the manipulations of magic and the hard work of its residents. Every part of Luxon Tenebris had an element of beauty. This was before the world became the battleground for a war between the vampires and the werewolves. During the conflict between these ancient adversaries, forests, lakes, and much of the world's natural resources were plundered to supply the grand armies of both sides. It was during this time that the humans were hunted like animals, caged, farmed and treated as livestock. The humans who once held the reins of power had become the fugitives of this war. Even the most ancient of the old races, the elves, were forced into slavery at the hands of the vampires, coerced to forge grand war machines powered by the arcana they revered. In the wake of this war, Luxon Tenebris had become a shadow of its former self. While battles raged across the face of the world, Vampire Queen Viessa Casimir saw a means to end the conflict and, in turn, eliminate her mortal enemy, the Wolf King. With her enthralled elves controlling the most powerful of magic, the Vampire Queen created a ritual that would bring about the true darkness, the darkness that dwelled inside her. Once released, the Queen hoped to cover the surface of Luxon Tenebris in her endless night, her sacrifice casting the world in shadow. What Queen Viessa did not count on was the cunning of the elves who despised their lives in captivity. This race of spiritual beings who once held life so dear had become fueled by hate from the abuse they endured at the hands of their vampire overlords. Hoping to end their servitude, the elves toiled and created a ritual of their own design that, once merged with the essence of Queen Viessa, could bring forth not only her inner darkness, but the darkness that dwelled within all vampire kin. This, they hoped, would corrupt the ceremony, resulting in the demise of their new queen and that of their captors. They knew that they themselves would be caught in the rapture, a price they were willing to pay to rid the world of the vampire menace. What was not anticipated by either the elves nor their queen was that through corruption and war, the world's resilience had been weakened. The elements that lived within the planet's core, protecting the world from the calamities caused by man, had been contaminated, leaving the world susceptible and weak. The power that was about to be unleashed would be unable to be contained within the boundaries of the world. It was a mistake that would have dire consequences for all. The elves, once intrinsically connected to the natural world, had become corrupted by Queen Viessa's machinations. The elemental forces of nature learned of the infectious risk the elves posed to their kind and severed the elves' connection to their power. This action caused the elves' predictions to become flawed, and they were unable to sense the elemental will of the world. These natural forces aimed to prevent their own destruction, and instead of relying on their former allies, turned their attention towards the human as their only means to survive. Warning them of the impending cataclysm, the humans heeded the elementals' advice and began preparations for the events that would soon come to pass. The humans focused their magic into gigantic ruin-encrusted obelisks that their cities were built around. These enormous magical artifacts, often referred to as guardians of old, had stood since the dawn of recorded history. Long thought dormant, each was housed at the heart of every city, its core brimming with a power the humans did not understand. The obelisk's true purpose was unknown, but the humans did not break in their resolve, continuing to imbue these constructs with all the magic they could summon. Queen Viessa's plan was simple: ravage the earth with her power, then swarm her forces to the lands above. While the humans prepared, the Queen assembled her armies in the catacombs below the surface. When the first words of the ritual were uttered, the earth began to shake, and the ground cracked and crumbled at their feet. The darkness spread from Viessa's core and flowed around them, draining the elves of their life and their magic. Their energies combined, and the Queen was consumed in the exchange. Unable to contain the defiled magical energies, as predicted by the elementals, the crust of Lux in Tenebris shattered. While the surface of Lux in Tenebris fell away, and the oceans disappeared into the night, the cities of man rose above the destruction of the world. The obelisks, and in kind the elementals, had saved them, and the floating city-states journeyed through the forming darkness into the bright sky above. Each city came to rest on the edge of the abyss, and it was now up to the resilience of humankind to weather the coming war between the darkness and the light. Okay guys, so welcome to the second season of the Dice Pearl Podcast live play series. This time, as promised, we will be doing a campaign based in the Night's Edge setting, which was developed by us here at the Dice Pearl Podcast. So what I'll get each of you to do is we'll firstly introduce our players, which will consist of Mike, as in GM Huz, Martin, as in GM Flano, Caitlin, as in GM Caitlin, and we also have, rejoining us, is Madeline, or PC Madeline. So,
yes, hi.
Welcome. All right, so the thing that listeners have to obviously be aware of in this circumstance is that this is a setting in development. So there are some things that might change with the final release of the product. So this may be a bit of a play test as such. But by all means, what we'll be doing is putting up different characters as the season progresses. And we may also put up some NPCs as well, so people have a bit of an idea as to what actually goes on in the setting. Alright, so the campaign for this season will be based, initially at least, on the floating city of Lakeport. Now, Lakeport is one of several dozen cities which, during the Great Fracture, as I explained at the start of the episode, were magically protected from the destruction of the world below and were raised above the clouds and beyond the reach of the Shadow Realm. Now, effectively, the cities all lie somewhere between what they like to call the Night's Edge. So our story will be based around the adventures of a crew of a Lightning Trawler, and we've affectionately called it Calamity. So what we'll do is have each of you introduce yourselves and then tell us a little bit about your characters. So, Mike, would you like to start us off?
Okay, I'm playing Artemis Gristlemore. Now, he's a werewolf, and a berserker at that too, is his career. Now, each werewolf has 3 different pack types. Well, they derive from different bloodlines, I should say. And he's a mongrel, so he hasn't really got a stable bloodline. He hasn't got a pack that he calls home. So he's a bit of a solo wolf out there, I guess you could say. And the mongrels are cool in the fact that you can use their brawn instead of willpower for coercion checks.
Cool.
So you can imagine he's quite the intimidating presence aboard the airship with his brawn of 4, so he can coerce fairly well. As for his physical appearance, he's a big burly werewolf, 7'1", grey colouring, very large, heavy-set mane. He wears a lot of fine clothing, so when you see him, he looks like a ship captain on a very profitable trawler. So he looks apart. He doesn't look like a feral wolf at all or anything like that. He's trim and proper, and he's meant to be there. And he's actually got some decent social skills, which is unusual for a werewolf, in the shape of leadership and coercion. But he can also, if need be, at a pinch, negotiate and sort out deals and bargains for the trawling. In terms of his motivations, I won't read every single word of his motivations, but I'll go across them in broad strokes.
Certainly.
He's adaptable. So he's willing to, step it up and change whatever needs to be changed for the situation. Most werewolves tend to go into situations with a very headstrong approach, kill, fight, and sort out the problems later on. So he's a bit more flexible and adaptable compared to other werewolves. His main, a bit of a flaw for him is a compulsion. He always needs to move around. He can never stand still for very long. So he's always out traveling. He's always seeing the world, but at the same time at his own detriment, that he can't settle down and find a home or be at peace. He's always got to move. But that comes, a lot of that derives from the fact he's always seeking knowledge to discover the Wolf King, or find knowledge to lead to the discovery of the Wolf King. Because in our backgrounds and in our story of our setting, all the wolves are cursed in the fact they can't change back to a human form because there's been a curse placed in the bloodline. And the Wolf King, the original descendant, or is that the word I'm looking for, descendant? The original wolf that started all the bloodlines, he's been cursed and he can't turn back to a human, and therefore all the other werewolves can't turn back to humans. So, much like many other wolves, this Artemis desperately seeks the whereabouts of the Wolf King, because that's everyone's main goal for their kind. Now, for his fear, he has a nemesis for his fear, and that's the Blood Kraken. Now, it's a bit of a ghost story amongst most sailors. However, it's a reality for Artemis. It's essentially a ethereal creature that comes up through the clouds and seeps into the minds of a sailor and turns them mad, that turns their nightmares into living entities. And something pretty horrific happened to his crew, and he's not willing to talk about it. In fact, he's taken on the rumor of him eating or killing his crew over discussing what the Blood Kraken discussed with him, or whatever transpired. So he's a bit haunted by this creature, or this nemesis. So that's his greatest fear, is coming across as Blood Kraken again, or the Blood Kraken delivering a promise or something. It's a bit of a mystery that he keeps to himself.
And Martin, tell us about your character.
Well, I'm playing Jericho Runetide, a scholar working out of the university at Lakeport. He's a bit of a spell slinger, sent to study the lightning that is all around this world. And he's using the trawler as a bit of a means to do that, because he's a bit lazy and a bit independent. So he doesn't like anyone relying on him or anything like that. So that's how he sort of dodges that responsibility, by being lazy.
Yep.
And he desires knowledge above all else. So that's really what drives him, is learning about or anything that he can about this world. But deep down, his fear is death. He's very afraid of what comes after, especially with this shadow down below that claims the dead. It haunts his nightmares.
Okay.
But he doesn't let on about that as much as possible.
Okay.
Because it's a bit of a shameful thing.
Cool.
But I don't know, looks-wise, he's got a shock of white hair on top of his head, and he sports a pair of glasses that have been modified to be able to... They're like a bit of a magical implement to see through darkness and increase his aim with his spellbound rifle and pistols that he wears as a brace across his chest.
Cool.
Yeah, he's pretty much what you'd expect of a scholar, except for the guns.
Nice. Okay, so Caitlin, who are you going to be playing during the campaign?
I'm going to be playing a Shade Touch Sneaky Sneak, whose name is Jonah Bonnie. She is pretty interesting of a character, other than the fact that she is Shade Touch, which means she's a little bit of a foot in the dark place, as well as, being human and looking somewhat human. She is a svelte but kind of average height type of character. Her face is also very angular, so it almost kind of gives like a hint of being a little bit elvish, but not quite. Like, it's just a little bit harsh features. But the thing that separates her, other than, of course, being shade touched, which everyone already doesn't want shade touched around, but she's been living her life mostly in the clouds, and lots of lightning around means she's gotten struck a few times. So it's very distinct on her skin, the types of lightning scars of when someone's been struck by lightning. And if no one knows what I'm talking about, please feel free to Google that. But effectively, it's these light pink scars that are basically going all over her body that almost look like trees and tree branches all across her skin. So very clearly, she's just the type of person that is very uneasy around. So Shade Touched is also able to effectively teleport different places by Umbral Leap, and they're very, very uneasy. She's also got bright red hair and bright green eyes, which anyone who knows pirate stuff is a redhead is bad luck on a ship. So she is just this common thing of people not really wanting her around. As I mentioned before, she is a bit of that stealthy, cunning type of character. But when it comes to her motivation, she's on the ship mainly because even though she is a shade touch and everyone tries to avoid her, she has this desire to belong somewhere. So she doesn't actually like being alone. She likes to go out and try and help people, but when she goes out and tries to help people, she'll never let on that she's actually helping them. So it's this very behind the scenes type of thing of going out of her way to help someone else in the hopes that maybe they'll notice, but no one ever really does. She has a fear of being isolated and being away from, and being alone and dying alone, because she doesn't actually really know how she became shade touched. It's just this history of this is how it's always been for her. She is a flaw in the fact of that she is an outcast. So that's like a new one. It's not in the book, but I just kind of created it for her, where she's often mistreated or ignored by the world, and people are more likely to cross the street to avoid her than they are actually even wanting to be seen in close proximity to her. So kind of joining this trawler as a useful tool in terms of something that could be useful to the ship, even though people are still a little bit uneasy, and she's just a bad omen all around. But she's extremely adaptable. So jumping from ship to ship, being sneaky sneak, she can adapt to most situations and can be quite handy.
Nice.
And everyone calls her Bonnie.
Everybody calls her Bonnie.
Yeah.
Okay. Madeline.
Okay, so I'll be playing a character called Honora Steelclaw. She's an attuned human that was raised by a pack of wolves. And werewolves, I should say. And she was brought up to pilot the ship with her attuned abilities, as she's a seer. And but the fun fact about her is that she's actually blind. and she uses her attunement and her elevated senses in smell and hearing to see everything sort of around her. And sort of the best way to describe it is like a daredevil-like blindness.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yes, and she's acts more werewolf than she does human because she's only ever been around werewolves. However, she lost her pack and her ship due to other pirates wanting to they just plundered the ship and everything there, and she was on her own, which is one of her greatest fears because she was very close with her pack, and she just thrived in that closeness and just being a part of a family with them. She's, as I said before, she's more werewolf than she is human. So she's a little bit ignorant in human ways, and she's more...
Okay.
That's one of her flaws.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, also, she thrives in closeness with her pack or her crew.
Yep.
Which is, she just wants to belong with them and just help them and be with them as a family.
Cool. Awesome.
Honora has wild brown hair. She doesn't ever really brush it. Although she's blind, she has a blue and a green eyes.
Oh. Okay.
2 different colored eyes. And she wears this cloak with tattered at the edges, and just from her werewolf pack days.
Yep.
Yeah.
She doesn't really like to throw it away as it was a gift. And she is average height.
Okay. Yeah, cool. I'm liking these characters already. All right, so a couple of things. Now, I know that we discussed this before starting, but can you tell me a little bit about as to why you've ended up on this Lightning Trawler? Mike?
Yes, I'd imagine, I think we've all sort of come together because I'm the captain or the owner of the Calamity, and because my character has a bit of a stigma to his past, thanks to the blood cracking and people fearing that he ate the last crew. It's a bit of a myth that gets around the various ports and whatnot that no one wants to work on the Calamity because of that.
Yep.
So he's basically thrown a bit of a wide net out and sort of caught upon all these oddballs onto the ship that he sort of feels more at home with anyway, because he's a bit of an oddball himself.
Yep.
So it only makes sense that everyone else that he's close to on the ship would be an oddball. Now, it's worthwhile pointing out that even though there's 4 of us, PCs, the Calamity has quite a large crew, because it is quite a large, equivalent to a seagoing vessel back in the early days of Voyage. So we have a large crew of about 25 individuals.
Yep.
That's made up of mostly NPCs. So I think that's my character's reason why he would be having everyone aboard the ship. But I'm sure each of you guys would have your own sort of means of being on there and why you want to be there.
Martin?
Well, obviously, I've decided that you've put up an application, an invitation for some crew to sign on board, and I need to get out there and see the lightning up close. Being an educated scholar, I have no idea about the stigma of this crew.
I'll never tell you.
Caitlin?
So for Bonnie, she is never really welcome on a lot of ships. She is the bad omen. So when it comes to joining on this crew, it was more like, you're an omen, I'm an omen, let's be omens together, in terms of being like these outcast people that, people probably talk more about than they actually really know any of the truth behind them. So, being the captain, welcoming a shade touch on board would probably be something where it's like, a bit more open to accepting people like myself than any other ship out there. Not to mention, she is very comfortable being in the clouds, and a lightning trawler lives its life in the clouds. So perfect type of environment for her.
Absolutely. Just a question, how does that make your character feel being out in the... Because you said before that you've been hit by lightning so many times. How does that make your character feel?
I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like it's weathered on her. Okay. So it's not something that she likes or that she enjoys, but it's not something that she shies away from either.
Okay.
I think in my mind, because of the way she is, it's almost like she's taken those lightning strikes so that someone else didn't.
Okay.
So, she doesn't exactly wear them with pride. I mean, the type of armor that she does wear is leathers, so she is covered and tends to have a lot of flowy type of leathers, so that when she's teleporting and going around, people can't really tell where she starts and her armor begins, kind of thing. So, she doesn't exactly hide them, but she doesn't actually put them on show either.
Sure.
In saying that, she also wears them with pride in that she did help other people, but when she does go into berserk, or when she does get very angry, the lightning and the magic inside of herself, being shade touch, actually makes them glow quite bright. So it almost as if kind of like she has become one with that lightning in a sense, where it's just like when it doesn't frighten her, she doesn't like it, but it's inside of herself, and you can see that when she becomes angry, she glows with those scars. So
maybe when you're about to go into a rage, you call upon the lightning, and it, like a lightning rod, it just comes down at you out of the sky and hits you, and that's what puts you into your rage.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I like this.
And you can tell it's about to happen because my scars, I should say, not my skin, my scars start to go ultraviolet. And that's how you know I'm about to be struck, and people just go, ooh, back away.
Back away slowly.
Yeah, back away, not today.
I can imagine when Artemis is near her, all his fur like statically goes up.
Stand up on
She
its
knows
head.
it's about to happen.
Yeah.
It gets very fluffy.
Very fun.
Which anyone who follows us on Facebook will really enjoy that comment. A lot.
So, Madeline, why is your character here?
Well, when my character heard of the invitation to join the Calamity, she heard that the captain was a werewolf, and that's a particular creature that she's comfortable around. But she herself didn't have a crew, and she wants to belong again with a crew or a pack, and she just decided that they need a pilot, so why not?
Cool. Mike, obviously you've been the owner of the trawler for a while, and as people may or may not know, that these trawlers they can be operated manually, but they're best operated with a seer on board. What happened to your seer? Did you ever have a seer, or is this something that sort of when Honora has approached you? Tell us about that.
Well,
Depends on who you ask.
yeah, exactly. Well, this goes back to what happened with the Blood Kraken.
Oh, okay.
And there is no place in the ship that the Blood Kraken's tendrils can't reach. And that includes a seer in their deprivation tank, which is the special little housing that the seer goes into when they want to fully bind and connect with the ship. And when they're in that chamber, the ship becomes an extension to their body, essentially.
Sure. Yeah.
So, as you can imagine, when the crew's all being driven mad by their nightmares come incarnate, that the poor seer inside the ship also was driven mad. So,
Terrifying.
and when the seer is driven mad, then means the whole ship starts going crazy and berserk. So the exact happenings of the seer, I can't imagine Artemis talking about, because that comes under his whole, I don't want to talk about that deal. I'd rather have people believe that I ate the crew. So I imagine something pretty heinous happened to the seer.
Right.
But the deprivation tank has long since been hosed out. So it's all good. It's all good.
So does that mean that you're a little bit more attached to Honora in that regard, because you're a little bit overprotective?
I think that Artemis would be overprotected for almost everyone on the ship.
Okay.
But especially he's seen what can happen to a seer. And so he knows that as one person to look out for, A, because what can happen to them is horrible, and B, the liabilities that occur when the seer goes mad is quite detrimental to the entire ship.
Yep.
So I imagine he's somewhat on edge when it comes to sailing the seas, not from anything the shade can throw at them, but more this mysterious blood kraken that surfaces and devours ship's hull.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Martin, your character. Obviously, the university has, or you've been on the ship as part of your university degree, as part of your studies and whatever else.
Yeah, working on my doctorate.
Has that had any benefit to the crew?
Yes, it is of a bit of benefit to the crew itself, because whilst I am receiving pay as such for working on the trawler, as everyone else does. My grant for working on my doctorate and things like that from the university has gone towards the operation of the trawler as well. So there's a little bit of money there.
Okay, interesting. All right, now I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to allow each one of you to ask one other character a question. And you have to explain that question. Although you have to answer the question. Just to give you a bit of because obviously the characters have been together for a period of time. So you would know a little bit about each other. So yeah, we'll start with Mike. You can ask any other player a question of their character. So Mike, your question, and to whom?
All right, Martin. So the question I have for you, what was your character's reaction when we very first went down into or below the clouds? Because imagine you've lived your life in university studying all this in books, but never have actually lived the potential horrors that lurk beneath the clouds.
Ooh. First impressions was absolute childlike wonder, because he's not. He at first he wouldn't realize the danger of what he's seeing, and he's read about these things in books and studied them his entire life. That seeing them up front is a delight for him. It is an absolute wonderful occasion and event. After about a week down there, he might have changed his tune. But when he first got there, it was something he'd been looking forward to his entire life.
Interesting. Martin, who would you like to ask a question of?
Madeline. So what was Enora's reaction to Jericho's use of magic? So his attunement is through these rifles, and it's all very refined and proper, whereas I imagine that your character is a bit more primal in the way she does things.
Yeah, it was a little different because my character has been around werewolves all her life, which is basically one-on-one sort of fighting, and to see that you're using rifles and guns and with your attunement, it was very different. And at first it was hard to sort of sense how you used it and how it worked and everything, because obviously I'm blind, but
so it has a different feel for you.
Yeah, it was hearing and smelling and just sort of feeling through the ship. It was very different, and I was just a little bit. It took a little getting used to, but I think I got it down now.
Okay. Just a follow-up question to that from the GM. I'm breaking rules because I can. So how does your character actually see magic? Since you can't see, how does that look in the fact that you can't see? What does that look like?
Okay, so normally without using my attunement, I can see through hearing. So I can basically, I'm going to use Daredevil again, but the sound bouncing off certain things, I can sort of sense the shape and form and sometimes the materials of things. And using my smell, I can tell when it's about to rain and those sort of things, because just like I can smell the wood of the ship and the different materials, because obviously metal will have a metallic sort of smell depending on the humidity and things like that. But using my attunement, I can sense magic a little bit more than I would be able to. Like I can feel. It's really hard to explain.
Yeah, I know.
I can.
Is it like a taste or something? Like it's an extra sense for you?
Yeah. With magic, I feel like it's a sort of vibration.
I like that.
That's cool.
Yeah, because with vibration.
I can almost imagine as well, because it's because all of your senses are heightened and magic being this extra sense, it's almost like an accumulation of all the other senses. So when you see using attunement, everything feels warmer. Everything has that feel to it, as
like
well
a
as the
hum.
smell and taste of everything just makes it that little bit more refined. So like if
More vibrant?
Yeah, like everything is just a little bit brighter. And so when you're using all your senses just normally, you might be able to feel the wind change slightly, you know something's going to happen. But when attunement comes through, it's like a hum all through your body. And that's what allows you to see.
Yeah.
Which is what makes you such a good seer as well. When
Yeah.
you go into that tank and all of your senses are deprived, the only thing that stands out is that extra sense.
And as well, being raised by wolves or being raised by werewolves, where everything is about primal instinct, follow your senses, follow your nose type of thing. You're even more attuned than even some of the other types of attuned humans.
We've fallen in love with your
I know,
character.
yeah, a little bit. little bit.
Yeah.
Very cool. Cool. So you're happy with that? I think
I
what you've
am.
described is brilliant. That's great. Okay. So who would you like to ask the question of?
I would like to ask a question to Caitlin when I think of one.
Take your time.
I'm very curious about your what is it? Shade touch. Okay. I'm very curious about your shade touch like abilities, and when we first met, I was very curious about that. I've never met one before, and I wanted to know more about how that worked and everything, and you explained it to me like
so. Actually, I think it would be pretty cool when we first met because you can't really see much, but then here I am, like, umbral leaping from ship to ship. And I can also imagine what it would have just looked like for you the moment I was actually struck by one of the lightning and went into a feral rage kind of thing. I think for me to try to describe what being a shade touched is all about is probably going to be about trying to explain colour to someone who can't see. So it would have been a very interesting conversation of two people that can't really describe a lot of what's happening around them and trying to do it in languages that don't even translate. So I can imagine we probably had a similar conversation to what we just had, where you're describing what it's like to see, and then here I am going, like, I have experienced absolute terror seeing the type of things that I've seen. And when you've actually seen that kind of darkness and been touched by it, you're forever changed. You're not the same type of person. You look at life differently, you look at the world differently, and everyone looks at you differently. And you feel everyone looking and being afraid of you when you're also afraid of yourself and what you've seen, and you're completely surrounded by this darkness forever. So being shade touched is almost like
the opposite of what I do, a hum and
Yeah.
there's warmth of feeling.
it's an emptiness.
Yeah.
It's like there's a nothingness. So you're constantly trying to find that hum, find that warmth, and there's just nothing around you. So I think that's as well why she's a little bit trying to find belonging and comfort in other people, where it's just never going to be found, because no one wants to be around a shade touched. But her abilities and how that would look to you, I almost kind of imagine how you see the other worlds happening, the other elements or the other senses around you. When I move, it's very, very different, because it's almost like I'm one place and you just see a little lightning trail, and then I'm over here somewhere. And then when I get struck by lightning and go into my feral rage type of moment, it's almost just like this giant bright white light. And it's not like a warm, but it's a cold light and that's how you know
That's
it's
very
me.
cool.
That's different, because it's cold and it's empty and it's dark, but it's also incredibly bright, which is a complete oxymoron to what you're used to.
Yeah.
So I think that's how we would have had that conversation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Caitlin, who would you like to ask the question of?
Oh, okay. Who am I going to ask a question of that hasn't already been asked a question? So, Artemis, I would be interested to know what you thought of Bonnie the first time that you met her and saw her, and what you thought of having a shade touched on board.
Well, I think Artemis would have seen sort of a kindred spirit, because Artemis, being a mongrel, sort of grew up alone out of a pack. So he knows what it's like to sort of be downtrodden. He's had to fight hard to get to where he is. Like, nothing was given to him on a silver platter. He wasn't a part of some great noble werewolf bloodline. He was essentially... He could have quite easily become, a pirate in the middle of nowhere somewhere. So it's only through hard work and effort he's gotten where he is. And you can see that in Bonnie's character as well, that she's a person who struggles to fit in, and you're looking for that place to fit in. And so this ship, his ship, Artemis's ship, he's taken you aboard to give you that place to fit in, because everyone needs to fit in somewhere, so it might as well be here.
Very interesting. All right, now.
We're such a ragtag crew.
I know. It's very, very cool so far. Now I'm going to do something, again, a little bit different to throw you a little bit of a curveball. Now, as Mike, you mentioned before, that the Calamity has 25 NPCs. I'd like each of you to tell me a little bit about one of those NPCs.
I've got one already.
Cool. Awesome. We'll start with you then, Caitlin.
First thought that came to my mind is a crew member who doesn't like me.
Right.
Ooh.
Okay.
And constantly butts heads and is a bit of a show-off kind of He-Man type of character. I imagine his name is...
Gregor?
I was going to go Robin, but that's a hell of a lot better.
You could be Gregor Robin.
Yeah.
Hyphenated.
So his name's going to be Gregor. He's going to be the master engineer on the ship, because I really do think that he's kind of got a bit of a superiority complex. He is human in the worst way possible, which is this narcissistic type of I know everything and I am so great. And the fact that I'm a shade-touched, a female, a redhead named Jonah is a accumulation of all things wrong to be on a ship, and he does not like that. So I imagine he's one of those people as well that is not against violence towards women, because, well, I can defend myself, so that doesn't really bother him. But he will assert his authority in any way, shape or form, whether that is going against anything that I have to say or undermining me any which way possible, being violent against me, or just being plain big bully on the ship.
I'd imagine when Artemis is around, he's a completely different person.
Oh, yeah, of course, because you're a captain.
So he's sugar sweet when Artemis is around, and as soon as Artemis walks away, he turns into an absolute...
poo head.
Yeah. And I just imagine there was probably like a moment where that kind of happened, and he's kind of had this little sweet as pie moment to you while I'm sitting there, and I'm like, he ate his last crew, right? Just walked away.
Now, would you say that he's an attuned human, or is he just a normal human?
I think he's just a normal human, but he's got this air of superiority that
like a squib.
This is what the human in the worst way possible. He has all the worst traits of humanity. Narcissist, basically.
Cool.
But he is a good engineer. That's why we keep him around.
That's right.
And it's hard to get crew to stay on the ship because of the whole, the
captain
ate things.
Captainism might peckish sometimes.
Very good. Who else would like to have a go at a character?
I have someone.
Okay. Martin, go ahead.
He's an officer on the ship. He is a surgeon. Given the type of work that we do, it's kind of dangerous. Lightning and occasionally pirates. He's kind of important. He's a werewolf, oddly enough, though. A hulking fellow, doesn't seem to have the delicate touch, but he's from the Prowler bloodline, the clan of wolves. And so he has a gift with scent and smell. And much like dogs in modern world, he can sense illness in people.
Okay.
And so he uses that talent to apply that to his work on the ship. And he's come to us as well because generally people don't like werewolves cutting them open and things like that. So he's not really welcome elsewhere either.
Sure. Okay. And does he have a name?
I was thinking Lionel.
Lionel.
Oh, lion.
Okay. Who else would like to suggest an NPC?
Yeah, I can go next.
Okay.
I'll suggest one.
Go ahead, mate.
In fact, it's one of the Flashmen. And the Flashmen are the crew who are in charge of harvesting the lightning and making sure it gets to the battery is just fine. That's what their main job is. They're the overseers of it. And I imagine there's one flashman. It's a young female called Alexandra. Now she just fairly bright. She's works hard, but I imagine she's sort of got a bit of a fear of me. Maybe she's terrified of werewolves in general and my reputation of eating the last crew. And she's anywhere I'm around, she just turns pale in colour. But Artemis is sort of ignorant to it. So when he's giving her commands, she sees a light flash before her eyes. Because Artemis isn't subtle. He will tell you what to do, but she just doesn't like being around Artemis whatsoever.
Interesting. And what sort of race is she?
I'd say
she's human?
Just a human.
Okay.
Yeah.
Attuned or?
No, just a regular human.
Okay.
I imagine that there's been a few times where you've barked orders at her and she's frozen, and I've had to pull her out of harm's way or done something. So she's kind of one of the people I've had to kind of look out for, because she's just, as much as she's valuable to the ship, she just is she's not made out for this kind of life.
Especially when she fears the captain.
Yeah.
A minor detail.
So with Alexandra, just a question for you, Mike. With Alexandra, if she's so fearful of the captain, why is she still on the ship?
She has to be there. She's one of the few who have trouble finding a job. Perhaps she, again, hasn't got the belly for this sort of work normally, and she's been kicked off ships before for being, failing under pressure. And so she's sort of had no choice but to come aboard the ship. And she's trying her best not to be like that. She's like, imagine her waking up one morning going, right, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to go out there into the clouds and no fear at all. I shall know no fear. Then next minute she realises the captain is a wolf that has a reputation for eating its last crew. So it hasn't done a good job of bolstering her resolve whatsoever.
Right. Okay. Would you consider her to maybe have a little bit of a bad reputation then?
Maybe, but I imagine because she's a flashman, and flashmen spend most of the time below deck anyway, monitoring the batteries and lightning.
Yep.
So they don't have a whole lot to do with on-deck duties. So imagine it is one of the few roles aboard the ship you could do relatively out of harm's way.
Yep.
So maybe her cowardice, I guess is the word you're looking for, hasn't really been noticed because she hasn't been put into a situation yet where it can affect anything.
Sure. Awesome.
If this was an anime, that's your love interest in the future.
That might be true.
It's not fear she's feeling, it's love.
Sometimes those things coincide.
That's the beating of her heart, not from fear, but from adoration.
It's when the lines blur.
Right, so obviously we're adding the romance tone to the campaign. Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, no problem. Madeline, last on the rack. Tell me a little bit about another NPC which is on board the ship.
Okay. I was thinking the navigator.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
That
Yep.
would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except I'm thinking that the navigator would be sort of all girly and just...
She's like the
it's like-
opposite of you.
Yeah, it's like, I need to teach Honora the ways of reaching presses and things and all of that.
This could be interesting because we could say, adding to our own fluff and lore of this universe, borrowing somewhat from 40k, navigators are attuned people themselves, and they specialise in reading the currents and flows of the arcane lightning. So they're hired from sort of noble houses. So she would be quite from an affluent family. So there's a reason why she is prim and proper. Just throwing it out there.
That's really cool.
Yay, it fits in perfectly.
I also kind of have this feeling that she's a little bit young as well, and this is maybe her first outing, so she's very innocent and
And that's why she's taken to you.
Yeah.
And she's like, I need to teach you the ways.
Yeah.
Like you're not acting like a young girl should.
But then there's also this other element of, darling, we're now in the clouds. I got to teach you how to look after yourself. So you kind of have this little moment of how she's teaching you how to be prim and proper, and you're teaching her how to survive.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's cool.
What's her name?
I was thinking Talia.
Talia. I like that name. Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a ship, we now have a crew, and we have our lead characters in this story. So is there anything else that you may have to ask me as the GM before we start?
Did you have us make NPCs in case our characters die in the first couple of minutes?
No. He has to have NPCs so he can pluck them away from us.
Oh. That's heartless.
Mike.
Wow. He's right. But wow.
Wait. I'm just writing down the NPC's names.
Oh,
and
I
stuff.
thought you were writing their epitaph or something like that. So.
No.
Okay, so as the final part of this this description, this introduction to the characters, I'd like each of you to tell me something particular about the ship. Mike.
In what way?
I'm
Like a
basically
quirk or...
just a quirk or something like that.
Okay.
That you sort of, it can be something about that you've noticed. It could be something that's a little bit different about the ship. I'm just trying to give the ship to be another character.
Okay. When the Calamity goes under the clouds, it actually seems to harmonise and sing a lot more to the seer, to the pilot, as if it belongs below the clouds, not above the clouds.
Okay.
It's more at home, it's more comfortable.
Martin, tell us a little bit about the ship.
Well, it's not something that would be apparent to anyone that walks its decks, but to those that are perceptive and look close, you can see around, on corners or edges along the wall or on pieces of equipment, small gashes or marks, maybe, a bit of rust here or there, signs of some previous struggle or fights that have happened on it.
Okay, so it's obviously has a history of being involved in combat. Okay.
Yes, or perhaps there's even something that went down during the Blood Kraken incident.
Oh.
Previous owner was a nightmare.
Caitlin, tell us one thing about the ship.
So the one thing about the ship that Bonnie really likes is there's a little room space at the top of the blimp where she likes to spend pretty much all of her time. And because she can teleport, because effectively what she can do is teleport, it's very easy for her to get up and down. So that's kind of where she spends most of her time. And particularly when the ship goes under the clouds, the lightning is cracking all around her. And whilst it doesn't, make her feel all too good, it is also extremely soothing and calming that's the right place for her. So it's almost like you kind of, if you want to know where she is, she's up there with the lightning at the top of the blimp.
So that's kind of like your safe place. Yep. Okay. Madeline, tell me one thing about the ship.
Well, Honora obviously spends the majority of her time in the sensory deprivation tank. Or in that sort of room where it's located. And she really likes it there because it's just a nice open space. There's comfortable textures and things like that, which she really appreciates because, she's blind. And she likes to spend her time there. It's not necessarily a duty because... it's just a nice, comfortable space for her. It's got nice little couches and things for some reason, but they're there. And she just likes to be there because it's nice.
Cool.
It's her home.
A little
peaceful.
werewolf den.
One more thing to add, another quirk to the ship, that when it's below the clouds and when it's sailing smoothly like it's meant to be there, between the creaking of the wood and the decks, people have been saying, and the crew have been murmuring, that they can just very occasionally at night when they're just trying to sleep or when there's a change of shift or something like that, they can hear the whisper, a really faint, on the edge of hearing whispering emanating through the ship.
Spooky. I like it. Excellent, guys. Well, thanks for going through that, the establishment of the ship. That gives us a good look and feel of what the ship is like and how it kind of fits in with the story. Just to give the ship a little bit of a little bit more character as well. Because in any sort of game where you have the crew on board a ship, whether it be Star Wars, whether it be this particular game, that it becomes a second, or in this case a fifth character. to explore, and who knows what might happen with the ship along the way. So next episode we will start the adventure and go from there. Sound good?
Cool. Sounds good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to the introduction episode of the second season of the Dice Ball Podcast live play series. We all here at the podcast hope that you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we have creating it. So now you know our crew: Captain Artemis Gristlemore, the Werewolf Berserker; Jericho Roontide, the attuned human spellslinger; Jonah Body, the Shade Touch Sneak; and Honora Stillclaw, the attuned human seer. What adventures await our newly crafted heroes? Find out the answer to this question and more when the Dice Ball Podcast Live Play Edition returns for Part 1 of The Night's Edge, Voyage of Calamity. My thanks go to my players, Caitlin, Martin, Michael and Madeline. It literally was not possible without them. If you have any feedback on our setting or this episode, you can send us a review via iTunes, on Facebook, or send us an email to info@thediceballpodcast.com. I'm Jim Hurley. Thanks for listening, and remember, the Dice Ball Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Ball Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Ball Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dice Ball Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesys Role Playing Game, the Genesys logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.